Hello, we're going to start our Etta sew along by looking at, we're going to start with our lining. So for that we are going to need one of our lining panels, which has been interfaced with woven fusible interfacing. We need our zipper pocket facing panel, which has been been interfaced with a non-woven interfacing. If you haven't got non-woven interfacing, don't worry, use a woven interfacing. This is meant to be a scrap buster, so if you haven't got something, just exchange it for something else. It's not going to make a vast difference. You need your two zipper pocket lining panels. Again, I've done a woven fusible interfacing. And you need a zipper, a number 3 dress zipper. So that's smaller than the number 5 that you would use in the top of a bag. These are about approximately 1 inch wide from one side to the other, and the zipper teeth are 3 millimeters across, hence the number 3. A minimum size you're going to need is about 7.5. I always use longer and cut them down because I find it's easier to buy them longer than I've got them the right size. So we are going to start by making some marks on the back of our facing panel. So I've already made my marks, but we're going to draw a line centrally from one side to the other, from the short end to the short end. So that's 1 inch in from the side. This panel is 2 inches wide, so 1 inch is halfway. Then we're going to make another line that is 1/4 of an inch. It's not 1/4 of an inch, it's 1/8 of an inch. I do apologise, I'm clearly not focusing this morning. 1/8 of an inch either side. So this is the central line. I've done another line 1/8 of an inch above and another line 1/8 of an inch below, giving me 1/4 of an inch gap in the middle. I've done another line that's 1 inch in from this short end and 1 inch in from this short end, which will give me a rectangle in the middle that is 6.5 inches by 1/4 inch high. At each end of that rectangle, I've added a triangle that goes from the outer corner to that central line and out again. The triangle is approximately 3/4 of an inch from this point to the apex of the triangle. You can make it a little longer if you want to. I wouldn't recommend making it any shorter than 1/2 an inch, just because if you do, you sometimes get fraying at the end here when you turn your pocket through. So that's my my zipper pocket facing marked up. And now I'm going to take my main lining panel. So you've got 2 lining panels, they're exactly the same. So pick one of your lining panels, and along the top edge, so the top straight edge, we're going to mark a line that is 1 inch away from the top straight edge. Now I use a chalk marker. You can use your Fixon pen or whatever is your sort of chosen marking tool. So I've now popped a line across there. It's difficult to see because that fabric is stripy, but there is a line, I promise you. Then I'm just going to fold it in half this way to find the centre of that line. It's easier to fold in half than it is to mess around measuring. I'm going to take my zipper facing panel and I'm going to fold that in half and give it a finger press in the centre so that I know where the centre of that is. And I'm going to lay my zipper facing panel right sides down on my fabric with the top edge of the facing panel touching that 1 inch line that I created on my lining panel. Now, if you want to pin that down, you can do. If you want to pin it in place, that's fine. I don't pin. I just find I don't need to. And what we're going to do is we're going to stitch down the outside edge of that rectangle, not the short ends, just the outside edge. Make sure that you start and finish right on the corners where that rectangle comes to an end, and finish at the same place at the other side. So I'm just going to go, I'm just back stitching a couple of stitches to make sure that the stitching doesn't unravel. I'm going all the way down one side, just making sure I get right to the end of the rectangle. Trimming off threads, and then let me just move you around slightly so you can see, because I think ignore this. This is it's not, my machine's not broken. I have a light. The Juki is a great machine, but the lighting isn't great. So I have an extra light, but unfortunately it doesn't. It's a magnetic fastener. It doesn't attach to the back of my machine. So I've actually gaffer taped a very large metal washer to the back of the machine, which the magnetic thing sticks to quite easily. I've often getting asked if my machine's broken. It's not broken. It's just been adapted to suit me. And we're stitching down the other long side. So now we've stitched both sides of our rectangle, but not the short ends. So no stitching on the short end of that rectangle. And I'm just going to fold that in half, make a small cut on the central line that I can just, it's just enough to get my scissors through, so that I can then cut along the central line and out to the corners of that rectangle on that triangle. Don't cut into your stitching and don't go further than where the stitching is. If you go further, you're going to end up with strange corners on your zipper aperture. And what we're trying to create is a really nice, tidy, sharp rectangle to put our zipper in. So there we go. You can see I've cut, and I've got these two little triangle bits, one either end, and I have a hole that goes straight through the middle. I'm working on one table, so I've got bits and pieces all over the place, so you'll excuse me if I look like I'm not very organised. I do try and be organised, but to save me keep going up and down, because my cutting table and ironing station is behind me, and I don't want to keep moving the video because it makes people feel seasick. So I'm just using my ironing pad, and I've got things kind of spread around my table. So it looks a little bit chaotic. It's not normally as chaotic as this. So with my lining panel right side up, I'm just going to push both sides of that facing panel and give them a finger press right on the very edges, just to make sure that they're nice and sharp. Now if you want to get your iron and just give them a little press, you can do. This just helps to make this pocket really sharp. I think it's really important that the inside of your bag looks as good as the outside of your bag. So I'm going to take the ends of the zipper facing panel, and I'm going to push it through the cut that we made to the reverse of my lining panel. And I'm going to do the same with both sides. Now if I give those two end bits a little tug from behind, you can see that a lot of that facing panel just kind of pops through. It just disappears from the front and kind of goes through to the back. Now what you will have to do is you will have to roll that fabric between your fingers to ensure that the facing fabric stays on the reverse. Now ideally, if you've got a really sort of bright coloured fabric, then the best thing to use for your zipper facing panel is actually the same fabric as you're using for your lining, because then if you do have any of the facing fabric showing on the front, it's not going to be overly obvious. Once you've got it folded and you feel sort of comfortable with it and it looks good, you can then just press it in place. And I do one side at a time. I don't try and do both sides. I have done in the past, and it's not easily, it's just, I don't think it's as achievable. So I think you're taking your time and doing one side at a time, and then pressing and pressing and pressing will give you a really good finish. You shouldn't see any of your facing fabric on the front of your lining panel. So there we go. I have a perfectly rectangular zipper aperture, and none of my facing fabric is showing on the reverse. Now because we didn't stitch the ends, we haven't got any gathering or puckering at the ends of this zipper aperture. If you stitch the ends as well, you often get puckering, which is really difficult to get out. And you can see my facing panel is completely on the reverse. There's a little puckering there, and that's fine. That's on the back. Nobody's going to see that. So I'm just going to pop that out of the way because I don't need that bit now. Now I need my zipper lining panels, the zipper pocket lining panels. I'm going to take one of my panels, and with my zipper, and always check that your zipper opens and closes before you put it in your pocket, because sometimes they don't. I'm going to lay my zipper along the top long edge of my pocket lining panel. The pocket lining panel is right side up, the zipper is right side up, so the pull is on the top here, so it's facing upwards. And I'm going to stitch along this side using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now if you really want to, you can clip it in place, or you can pin it in place. I generally don't. To be fair, I don't do anything if I don't have to. I'm a lazy sewer. There are some things where I feel that you really have to clip and pin well, and some things where you just don't. And this is one of those where I'm confident enough doing it, but I don't usually clip. So now we have the zipper attached to the top of our lining panel. Now bear in mind, I'm using a longer zipper. This lining panel is 8.5 inches wide, so if you're using an 8-inch zipper, then it will be slightly shorter than this, rather than mine's overhanging. I find the whole thing easier with a longer zipper, and I find them more economical. So I'm going to take my second lining panel, laying it right side up on the table. With my first lining panel, I'm just going to unfold the zipper from the top of that lining panel that I've already attached it to, and I'm going to lay my zipper against the top long edge of my second lining panel. One thing I will make sure is that the sides of my lining panels match up perfectly. Now this one I do sometimes clip. It depends how my fabric moves, but I'm going to attach that zipper to the second lining panel using a scant 1/4 inch. Now scant 1/4 inch seam allowance is just less than a 1/4 inch. A 1/4 inch, I believe, is 6 millimeters. So if you did it at 4 millimeters, that would be perfect if you're a metric person. If you're an imperial person, then 3/16 of an inch, something like that. If you've got that sort of mark, I just generally go a bit less than a 1/4. It's not quite as scientific as it might be. Ironing pad. Now I have my zipper caught between the two lining panels, and you can see the zipper is pretty much hidden by the seam allowance. So we're now going to lay the two panels down, and I'm going to open the seam allowance on either side of my zipper with my iron, and I'm just going to press it open. You can press a nylon zipper without any problems at all. Obviously you don't leave the iron on it for hours, but you can press it it won't impede, it won't melt the zipper unless you leave it on for a long time. However, I would warn you that if you're going to use a metal zipper, they get really hot. So if you do press over the top of a metal zipper, just be careful you don't touch it straight away, because you'll end up with 3rd-degree burns. Voice of experience. I've turned it over because I don't want any puckering on this side, so I've just given it a press from both sides. Okay, so that's my zipper open. My zipper seam allowance is open. Now, because my zipper is longer, I'm just going to move my zipper pull into, so it's within the sides of the two lining panels. I'm going to take my exterior, my main lining panel that I've put my aperture into, and I'm going to position this over the top of the zipper teeth so that the aperture has the teeth sitting centrally within it. Now, I don't measure this, and you can mark the lining pieces centrally if you want to, but I find, let me just move that down slightly, that actually where the lining sticks out at the top, the pocket lining sticks out at the top, you can kind of see that there's a similar amount left out on both sides, which will give you an indication that it's central-ish. And central-ish is near enough. It doesn't have to be absolutely spot on. Now I'm just going to change my foot to a zipper foot. going to pull out some threads to get some nice long threads, because we're going to bury our threads. So my zipper is situated nicely centrally within that zipper aperture. If you want to, you can pop a couple of pins on either side. If you feel more comfortable, you can pop a little drop of double-sided tape on a little line of double-sided tape on either side of your zipper, so that when you pop your lining panel over it, it sticks. I'm not a great fan of double-sided tape. I tend to make a terrible mess with it, so I try and avoid it as best as I can. So I tend to position my zipper, and then I'll just take it to the machine and I will start stitching. Now I've left long threads at the beginning and the end. So basically I'm leaving long threads on top and long threads on the bobbin, so that I can tie off my threads at the beginning and the end. So I'm going to start my top stitching around my zipper aperture, and I'm stitching at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, but I'm not going to back stitch because I am going to bury those threads. So my first stitch goes in, go too quickly, you don't want to overshoot the end of your zipper. Pivot so that you're coming up the short side of your zipper. Now take this slowly, because you will be going over the zipper teeth. I quite often like to do that just by hand cranking. If you go too quickly over the zipper teeth, even with a nylon zipper, you can break your needle. So it's just not worth the hoo-ha. If you've got a metal zipper, if you're using metal zippers, then it's best to remove some of the teeth at the point where you know you're going to be stitching over the top of the zipper. You can stitch over the top of a metal zipper if you're very careful and you kind of jiggle it around so that the needle goes down between the teeth. But I often find that if I do that, and I don't very often use metal zippers, the needle will go through, but the sides of the metal zipper will actually shear the thread that's in the machine. So I find if I do use a metal zipper, it's a lot easier to just remove the teeth. Let me just move my zipper pull out the way. So I'm now coming down that short end again. What I aim to do is to land in the first hole that I stitch, so that there's a continuous line of stitching. Once I've landed in the first hole, trim off my threads, leaving long threads top and bottom. So I now have a thread here from the start and a thread from the finish. Likewise, I have a thread from the start and a thread from the finish on the back from the bobbin. So I'm going to take my 2 threads, and I use a self-threading needle. You can use an ordinary needle if you want to. I just prefer a self-threading needle because I can do 2 at a time. And I'm going to pop both of those threads through to the back of my work using one of the needle holes, well, the next needle hole along from my stitching. So now I have, hard to see because the thread is green, but I have 2 threads here from the front and then 2 threads here from the back. So I'm going to pop a couple of knots in just to secure all of those threads. Now this is on the back of the zipper right at the end. Nobody is going to see this. Now you can either just trim off those threads, or if you prefer, I can usually do these 2 at a time. Take 2 of your threads and thread them on and pop them through, just through the edge of the lining, so that the threads disappear between the lining, pocket lining and the main lining. So you won't have any little stray threads at all inside. This is right at the top on the inside of your zipper pocket. I shouldn't think that anybody's going to inspect it. However, if it makes you feel comfortable, then do that. I don't like to have lots of threads inside or out, because I know they're there. You can trim off any long bits, that's not a problem. And then basically your zipper is installed, so you have a nice zipper installation, and that's fine. So turn your panel right side over and you'll notice that one of your lining panels is longer than the other. We're going to trim off that last little bit of zipper lining. It's only approximately 1/2 inch, so it's not anything to worry about. We're going to take our ironing pad, and along the bottom edges of both of these lining panels, I'm going to just make I'm going to finger press it to start with, a fold of approximately 1/4 inch. I'm not measuring it. It's approximately 1/4 inch, and basically I want the same sort of fold on both of the lining panels. So once I've finger pressed it, I'll just throw the iron on to kind of keep it in place. And we're doing this so that it makes it tidier when we finish up our etta. Because we turn through the pocket, we don't want the bottom of the pocket to look scrappy. So let's just pull that one down over the top. Does that look about right? Yes, that looks about right. So I'm literally eyeballing. This is inside of a pocket, inside of a pouch. So we are not, you can measure it if you really want to. It's just not me. They are approximately 1/4 inch and they approximately match. So with your panel right side up, your lovely zipper that you've just installed, pull the side of your, I just need to change my foot again, sorry. This bit does take a bit of foot changing. So lift the side of your work up and you will see the zipper facing panel, the sides of your pockets, and if you've got a longer zip, the side of your zip. We're going to stitch down the side of that pocket using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you get to the bottom towards the folds that you made, make sure that those folds stay folded. It'll make it much easier when you close your pocket later on. So you sometimes get caught on the side of your needle plate and what have you and open up. So just try and make sure that they stay folded as you stitch over them. Any surplus seam allowance or surplus zipper, just trim it off. Just removes any bulk from underneath there. Turn your work around and we're going to fold over the other side and do exactly the same on the other side of the pocket. This time we're working from the bottom of the pocket to the top. Again, making sure that those folded edges along the bottom stay folded. Coming up, you're going over the pocket linings and over the zipper facing and over the remainder of the zip if you have any. Back stitch at the beginning and the end to make sure it stays secure. And trim off any excess. Now at this point I like to just give the whole thing a bit of a press just to make sure it's all kind of doing what it needs to do. There we go. So that's our internal zipper pocket completed. I'll be back in a second to show you how we start our construction of our pouch.